All right, so thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this amazing conference. I love the mixture of different backgrounds and different presentations I've seen so far. So today I'm going to present a project that I'm working on with Mahmoud. So my name is Kim Trottier. I'm a professor at HEC Montréal. My background is financial reporting, corporate reporting, and accounting with a long sidebar of passion about coding. And then Mahmoud is obviously bringing the computational linguistics side to this, and we're hoping to kind of merge our two expertises together in a few projects that we have going on. And this is what I want to present to you guys today. Oops, okay. So I'm briefly going to go over what annual reports are for those of you who are not very familiar with them. And then I'm going to talk about who uses these annual reports. And then I'm going to talk about how they're able to extract text information from them currently. And this is going to segue into our contribution, which is a new tool for extraction called CARE. So annual reports can have a lot of different components, but at a very high level, you tend to see at least these components. An introduction. So first of all, annual reports. So introduction, a letter to shareholders, maybe from the CEO or the chair of the board, kind of explaining how what happened over the years, something like maybe, okay, COVID ate up all our profits this year. So that's a type of information you might see in the letter to shareholders. That's followed by a fairly long, mostly textual section called the Mdna, or management commentary. Here, the management gets to choose what they want to talk about, and they discuss performance, investment, future plans, strategy, and some key data, financial and market data. This is mostly narrative with some tables, so some quantitative and a lot of text in this section. It's fairly subjective at the moment. The standard setters, IFRS, are making the management commentary a little bit more streamlined. They've got some guidelines coming out to help make sure that everybody discusses somewhat the same stuff, but this is a very subjective and interesting area of the report. Next, in North America, at least, you would see a one-pager, which is the management responsibility for preparing financial statements. And this is a consequence of all the fraud that occurred in the 2000, like Enron and stuff, where at that point, management got dragged into the courts and they said, oh, I've never looked at the financial statements. So we've put an end to that with a letter that shows that they have, and they sign these letters. Followed typically by the auditor's report, which is hopefully a clean report saying these financial statements are properly presented, possibly with some reservations in a qualified auditor's report. This is a report that's getting bigger and bigger as well over time, with auditors having a little bit more room to discuss concerns they've had when they did the audit of the financial statements. And then followed by financial statements. Typically, you'll have 4, maybe 5 statements, depending on where the firm chose to present their other comprehensive income, accounting lingo. So basically 3, 4, 5 pages of financial statements. These are table formats. These are numbers. This section of the annual report has been analyzed to death because it's easy to get the numbers. You would not necessarily go to the annual report, but data providers everywhere can give you all the numbers. So this is where analysts and researchers have really focused their effort, is on these 4 to 5 financial statements. Finally, there's a section that I personally believe has not been examined enough, is the notes to the financial statements. So these 4 or 5 financial statements are very summarized quantitative measures. So what you'll find is for many of them, there'll be a note then further explaining what that number means. So in your balance sheet, you might have fixed assets of $5 million, just one line item that says that. Then it'll refer you to a note, maybe note 15, maybe note 20, which will take that $5 million and break it down and say, okay, Air Canada, they own 50 airplanes, they own these buildings, these trucks, and all this equipment, and they break it down on the age, the value, depreciation, lots and lots of really rich detail in the notes that has not really been examined that well. Part of the reason is because financial statements are numerical. The rest of the annual report tends to be mostly text. Reports tend to be around 200 pages long, so a lot of text that hasn't really been analyzed very well or very much. a lot of different sections going on. The reason annual reports are fairly popular in terms of analysis is that this is one of the few, possibly the only, really standardized, more or less standardized report that firms globally have to prepare. So firms in all jurisdictions have to typically prepare an annual report. They're very similar to one another to some extent. So you can really, compare a company in California to one in Paris, and you can do a lot of really interesting stuff. The other thing about annual reports is one of the few annual, regularly provided corporate reports that is also verified by an independent auditor. So the information in here has been verified to be, truthful, factual, and so you can really use it to do a lot of work that maybe you can't do as well with other voluntary types of disclosure. So who uses these annual reports? This is the usual suspects. This is a list we often go through. So current and potential investors might want to use it to get a sense of the value and the performance of a company. Creditors would use annual reports to gauge the solvency and liquidity and credit risks before they lend money to the firm. Regulators are interested in looking at this to ask themselves whether this company is a safe investment for investors. The accounting profession loves annual reports because we prepare them, and they use them for comparing what the competitors are doing. They look at annual reports for compliance reasons, and they prepare them, so they're quite interested. Other stakeholders are interested in the annual report to see whether the firm, where they stand on their social contract with the community. So building into what Claire was talking about in the workforce community. So a lot of stakeholders are interested in picking out what messages are coming from the annual report in terms of their social impact and social goals and stuff. And of course, researchers are interested in it because it represents data. But again, mostly research has been on those 4 or 5 financial statements. If you are a user of annual reports from US companies, you're in luck because it's very easy to get their annual reports. They're in HTML format. You can data scrape whatever you want. You can pick out sections that you want. It's super easy, publicly available, really simple. Anywhere else in the world, you're likely stuck with PDF documents that are not so easy to deal with in terms of doing text analysis. And that's where our project comes in. So currently there are some options to extract the PDF, the information from the PDF into a text format that you can use and analyze and do NLP on. There's of course generic software you can download from the internet, but that's not going to perform very well, especially in terms of images and tables and different fonts and stuff. Not necessarily the greatest. One large-scale kind of mass extraction of annual reports was done by Lang and Stice Lawrence in 2015. So what they did was they developed proprietary software to convert the annual reports in PDF format to ASCII format, and then they were able to do their analysis. And they applied this extraction to a huge data set, a huge corpus. They looked at 15,000 plus non-US firms in 42 countries. Non-US because, of course, US data is very easy to extract, so they just wanted to address the part of the research, the area that is kind of under-researched because it's so difficult to get the information. So they looked at 42 countries, 15,000 annual reports. My understanding is that they took the annual report in total, in completion, the full annual report, and did a bunch of analysis. So some of the stuff they pulled out was some standard text metrics. They looked at the length of the report. They had some boilerplate measures based on common tetragrams. They did a bit of comparability, so looked at the reports and compared it to US peers and saw how comparable they were. They used cosine similarity for that, and then some readability. So a bunch of text metrics that were meant to proxy for the quality of the reporting. And then they looked at the determinants of what these text metrics, the quality would be. So do firms that follow IFRS, so that's one very, very popular set of accounting standards, do firms that follow those standards, do they report a little bit better? Do they have better quality metrics? If they have some of the big auditors, that's often proxied for high quality audit. Does that really affect the text, the quality of the text they provide? They also looked at the consequences of having high quality text, high quality disclosures. They found that high quality disclosures, so longer, less boilerplate, more comparable, more readable, led to higher institutional ownership. So the big institutional investors were interested. It led to better liquidity, which is good for the corporation, and it led to more analyst following. So all sorts of good stuff came from good quality reporting. Another very important large-scale extraction was done by these authors. El-Haj et al. had a paper published in 2020. And I'm going to just say right off the bat that we were unabashedly inspired by the paper from these authors, because it's a wonderful paper. They created a wonderful tool. It happened to not work for us, but they were definitely, the inspiration behind this project that we're working on right now. So a few words on this paper. What they did is they developed a tool called the Cfie, Corporate Financial Information Environment. It's a tool, it's an algorithm that takes the annual report in PDFs and extracts them into text format into different sections ready for analysis. They made it open source, which is great. I really appreciate that. I had a bit of a try with the Cfie, and it's super easy to use, and it's really fun, I'd have to say, to use this, and it does a beautiful job extracting my annual reports from PDF to text so I can analyze it. Their approach for the Cfie was basically, in a nutshell, the algorithm identifies or locates the table of contents and anchors on this, and each item in the table of contents is considered a section. So then the algorithm will go through the PDF file and try to find all the sections based on the table of contents. The output, as well as having all this lovely annual report separated by section in text format, they also include some common metrics on readability, tone, sentiment, and other stuff, including a user-defined kind of functionality. So if the user wants to look for certain keywords, they can put that into the algorithm and run with that and get, again, lovely output, very easy to use. We really appreciated it. The authors also shared the data from them testing and running the Cfie on UK annual reports. So this data is ready to use for anybody who wants in the public domain. Very generous, again, for you sharing all that. The types of stuff they use the text, the data to explore. So they had a couple of research questions just to give you a sense of the things you can do once you've got this annual report in text format. You can look at a whole bunch of connections, association with these metrics and firm characteristics. So for example, they examined the length of the annual report and they connected that or regressed that against a firm size, whether it had a loss, book to market, return volatility, the number of segments, which is a measure of complexity, whether it was on the London Stock Exchange, a demi-variable, and other kind of metrics for length. So they did, found some interesting stuff there. But because they had taken the annual reports and separated them between financial statements and Mdna, they were also able to run some tests on the Mdna section only, which is quite different from the rest of the annual report. So, for example, they looked at the tone in the Mdna and looked at how that was connected to firm characteristics like the size, book to market, return volatility, etc. As well, they were able to, because it had the section for the Mdna only, they were able to look at the readability score and then regress that against some determinants of the readability. So they did some great work, but as you can imagine, if you take that annual report and you separate it into different sections, there's tons of things that nobody's looked at that you can examine, like the Mdna, the readability of that compared to the rest of the report. Or what about, is the message, are they repeating the message in the Mdna from the notes? Is it repetitive? Is it consistent? Is it more complex? Is it a different tone? So there's tons of things that you can examine once that you've split it up into section. But what we found, unfortunately, is that in the world of extraction tools, there is currently nothing available for Canadian annual reports, which is something that Mahmoud and I were working on. So in the Canadian annual reports, we were doing a project on one particular component of annual reports, which is revenue recognition. And I won't get into details about that, but we wanted to learn about revenue recognition. And when we tried the Cfie onto Canadian annual reports, we found it didn't work because very few of them have a table of contents. That's just not the format that most firms in Canada use. There's a lot of flexibility in the formats, but very few of them use table of contents. So we were kind of struggling and not able to extract the PDF into text format. And so that's the reason why this project was started, because we thought we'd really like a tool where we can extract the information from the Canadian annual reports. And so we're going to call our extractor, when we're finished with it, we're going to call it the CARE, the Canadian Annual Report Extractor. So basically, the extraction is going to be, instead of being based on table of contents, it's going to be based on the heading format. So the idea is that every time the heading changes, that's a new section. As we know, when you set up a document, you start with a heading that connects to the section. The next heading is a new section. The next time you see that heading again, it's a new section. So it's based on heading formats as opposed to table of contents. And the upside of it is it's more versatile. So it doesn't matter what the report is about, doesn't matter how they set it up. They will have headings. And so the extractor should work as long as there's some headings. We don't know what the downsides are going to be, but perhaps we're going to find that it's a little bit less consistent. So for example, I can imagine a firm has decided to use 8 levels of headings, where another firm has decided to use 3. And so when we run the extractor, we might find that I'm not 100% sure they're going to be easily comparable. So there might be some extra work to be done when firms decide to use different levels of heading. We plan to complete this project in a year, which probably means it'll take 2 years. I'm starting to come to terms with the researchers' timeline being different from the real world. The data that we're going to use is going to be Canadian data to start out with. So we have about 8,000 per year for 10 years. We're going to be using this data set. We have the benefit of being able to test it in French and English. We have no reservations about whether it's going to work in one language or other, because headings are headings are headings. It doesn't matter the language. So we'd like to see that it works for both. I would personally like to contribute in terms of providing a tool that allows better analysis of the notes to the financial statements. I really do feel like this has been an underexplored area of annual reports, because if you think about it, the text is roughly half Mdna, roughly half notes. So there's a huge amount of notes that have not been explored. And to the extent we can have a different section for each note, I think that's going to be really great. Just another word on notes as well. For those who are not familiar with financial statements, once you have those 4 financial statements, like the balance sheet, income statement, cash flow statement, all those statements, you'll typically have anywhere between maybe 15 and 50 notes, depending on the firm. The first note is pretty much the same for everybody. It's going to be talking about the business, their business process, their siège social, sorry, en français. Second note would be talking about their accounting policies. Third note might be about estimates and something like that. And afterwards, you're going to have maybe one note for each of the line items in financial statements. So a note on revenues, a note on fixed assets, a note on impairments and goodwill and consolidations and so much. So I can imagine a lot of researchers who are maybe just interested in looking at, say, maybe segmented reporting. What this researcher wants, analyst or researcher, they just want to look at 200 firms, and they just want that one note on segment reporting for each firm. With this extractor, they'll be able to do that. They can run it all on those 200 firms and just pull out that one note that they want to look at. So right now, currently, the only option is manually hand collecting those notes. So I'm hoping that we're really going to help propel forward the research and analysts interest in the notes to the financial statement, because I think there's a lot of rich information there that we haven't looked at. So the output that we hope to create, in addition to having all these sections in text format, just like the Cfie does, is we also want to have several measures of like NLP type measures of metrics that researchers and analysts can use. But we want to address basically a criticism that comes out every time we use FOG and FLESH and standard metrics on annual reports. Whenever we do, we get the criticism that says, well, you know, annual reports are different from other types of literature, other types of narratives that the metrics were designed for. So the FOG doesn't work on annual reports. The FLESH doesn't work on annual reports. We get that a lot. So to help answer this question or this concern, we have a small army of experts in annual report that we're going to use to help us assess what they think the readability of these annual reports are, what they think the tone is, and what they think the sentiment analysis might look like. So the idea is that these experts in annual reports, these are the people who prepare annual reports, who audit them, and who use them, and they know annual reports inside out. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some excerpts from our extractor that are considered, you know, low readability or high readability, and we're going to give them to these experts, and we're going to get them to rank the readability. And I just want to kind of do a little sidebar on an example of why we get the criticism on the readability in particular. Is so let's just imagine that you wanted to analyze two different notes in the financial statement. One note is a segment reporting. That's where the firm talks about all the different geographic or product segments. Another note is financial instruments, where they talk about their risks and how they address their risks with various financial instruments like derivative instruments and hedging strategies. So you have two notes, financial instruments and segmented reporting. If you run readability metric on it, you're probably going to get something fairly similar, or you might even get segmented reporting being shown as being more difficult to read because it has more longer words, bigger words. But to be honest, the word risk is way more ambiguous, way more contentious, and way more difficult to explain, understand than the word operating division. So this is why we get so much criticism. Like the word risk is really difficult and operating division is really easy. So we want to add to the literature by mapping out perhaps the FLESH and FOG score to what our experts say are high readability, difficult or easy to read, and same with tone and sentiment. So that's going to be hopefully one output of our project. The other one, I do have a minute to discuss this one. This is more of a wish list, and this is also coming out of the project that I have with Mo on the revenue recognition. So it's a project with IFRS, and essentially we were asked to evaluate annual reports in terms of their revenue recognition policy. And what we found is that the amount of text devoted to revenue recognition was really, really small. Some firms talked about it a little bit, some talked about it a lot. But if we took like some high level measure of revenue recognition keywords as a percentage of total words for all the firms in our sample, we would get stuff that would run like 0.0001% or 0.00012. They were tiny parts of the report. And so looking at the entire report, we didn't have enough variability among the firms to really tease out or figure out what's going on. So we developed these disclosure packets, which if this works well, this might be like an interesting venue for future research. But when we have a huge annual report, 200 pages, and on average, the firms would disclose revenue recognition policy information maybe from 1 to 20 times in these little packets of 1 to 2 paragraphs. So really tiny amount of information. But once we were able to identify and pull out the packets, then we had a lot of variation among the firms. So one firm had 0 packets. A few firms had 1 or 2 packets where they just talked about a few things, and then some firms had a lot of packets. So now we had variation. We were able to really have some insight and something to say about their disclosure on if the disclosure is a tiny part of the annual report. And then again, we could use, we used readability, sentiment, tone. We were able to apply all those metrics to our little packets. But hopefully we'd like to have the CARE have functionality in terms of being able to develop and share an algorithm where researchers or analysts are just looking for like a very small portion of the annual report and some very specific information in there. And then finally, once we develop the CARE, once we run it on all our annual reports, we have this nice, lovely data set, we're going to be able to analyze a few things. One of the things high on my list is just very basic descriptive statistics and the terminology. Like nobody knows how many firms are using statement of earnings or statement of profit of loss or statement of net income or whatnot. What are they calling all the elements, their accounts? So this would speak to a current effort by IFRS on tagging and taxonomy. So they would like to know what's the terminology that's commonly used so that maybe we can really get everybody to start using roughly the same terminology. So this analysis would speak to this particular initiative. Of course, we'd like to review some of the prior literature, so that the couple of analyses that I showed you from the prior papers, we can rerun those with Canadian data now that we have it. And then we can expand on other topics of interest that are very topical and interesting, like sustainability and corporate governance and a lot of other literature. Again, the ability to look at it by section, the ability to pull out the notes to the financial statements and look at those would be, I think, kind of an incredible move forward. So the next phase, if everything goes well, is given that the extractor is going to be designed to be headings based and very versatile, we think it's going to be a no-brainer to move towards developing it or using it in a bigger sphere. So globally, if it works very well for Canadian annual PDF reports, it should work for other countries as well, other countries who are stuck with PDF reports. So for example, Japan, Spain, Portugal, et cetera. And here's a bit of a shout out for anybody who's interested in maybe contributing or connecting with us in the future, that we could we'd love to have like a very large global collaboration once this tool has been tested and we know that it works well. We'd love to have this be used everywhere in the world where they need it. We can also see, again, distant future, we can also see the extractor being used for other statements that are connected to financial narratives, such as a proxy statement or other financial reports. So because, again, it's headings based, we think it'll work well for other types of reports as well, and are happy to explore how it works there. And I think I'm a bit under time, but I'm happy to hear what people think about it, suggestions, thoughts, reaching out if you want to get involved or help or have any other questions or suggestions.
Thanks a lot. That's really interesting, Kim. I know because I'm working on this. Actually, one of the projects that I really like, quite interesting. I mean, to see the contrast and the similarities between Canadian and UK annual reports. I mean, quick look and you think they're identical, but then when you start analyzing them, you realize how different the reporting is, despite both of them using the same language. I mean, I don't have any questions for my own project. I would love to, but as Kim said, it will be great in the future to collaborate with others on financial narratives in other languages. If there are any other data that is hidden somewhere and you're really looking for someone to analyze it, we will be more than happy to look into that and maybe collaborate for a future project. So for any questions, please type in the chat. We'll give you time because we know we're not rushing or asking you to like type faster than that. But do please join in if you want to ask. Raise your hand and we'll be more than happy to let you speak. Got a question, Paul raised on the slide, but I missed it.
Okay. So am I still sharing? I mean, the list that
asking about the list of countries and languages you're aiming at so far?
Sorry, the list. So the list so far is just, it's definitely not a comprehensive list. This is just a list of people that between Mahmoud and I, that we have enough connections that we think we can at least start with these countries, but definitely open to to discussing with anybody else. But so far we've got these as probably our first attempt, or first group, just because we know some people who might be interested, but it could be any country in the world. We'd really like to make this list much longer, and happy to talk to anybody about increasing this list if you want to represent your country. And in terms of languages, Mahmoud, maybe you can answer that one.
I mean, so far we looked into 3 languages in terms of reporting. So we looked into English, Spanish, and Portuguese. And earlier today, Antonio spoke about the Spanish data set, and that is part of a collaboration with Madrid. So on what we call FNESP, so the Spanish part of the project. We did collect Portuguese data before, so we've got some annual reports in Portuguese. Both languages, I mean, the reporting is quite complicated. The structure is even more complicated, but challenging, and is promising for more research in the future. I did speak to George in the past about Greek data, so that is something else that we might look to, and also Hebrew with Mdna, but we need more data, so we'll have more discussions with them in the future.
And in terms of the Canadian data, it offers, I don't know if it's a unique setting, but a lot of the annual reports are prepared in French and in English for it's the same data in 2 languages. So that'll be probably our best bet to start to see whether the languages whether the output is the same in both languages, because it's the exact same report, just in 2 different languages.
Yeah, and we've got a question from Dominic. So she's asking, do you already have any idea how you will evaluate the readability? So they do struggle having quality metrics in natural language generation, and they think that this might help.
We haven't started yet, so we're definitely open to any suggestions, especially if you've tried something and it's worked or hasn't worked. We'd love to hear from you. I think we were just thinking initially, just like a simplistic giving a bunch of extract. Once we run the readability metrics on different sections, we can pull out extractions, and probably will work, especially with the extreme ones, the ones that has a really high or low FOG score, for example, and then not tell that to our reader, but give them to our reader and get them to rank them to see whether at least the ranking is similar with FOG and FLESH versus the actual reader. Like if they're going to read maybe 20 or 30 excerpts, and they're going to rank them in terms of complexity, tone, and whatnot. So hopefully the ranking at least will be the same, and then we'll work moving forward from that.
Thanks. We've got another question also from Ethiop Sahug, asking that at Ethiop they work on producing French and English reports, and they work on the structure, so they're happy to collaborate in the study. That's fantastic, actually.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, any help we can get to get this project going. There's a lot of interest from a lot of people, but we really need to get it going. So if you guys can be involved, definitely.
I can see a hand risen somewhere, but let me see if I can. Can you?
I think it might be me, Mahmoud. Steve.
Oh, hi, Steve.
Hi, Mahmoud. Hi, Kim.
Hi.
So yeah, just on your point about readability and how it correlates with sort of external objective assessments. I mean, one thing you might want to do if you've got the opportunity, if you've got any awards, any annual report awards in Canada, then you might want to use those as an indication of reporting quality, and then see how that correlates with FOG. We did that in the UK, and